Alright, say it with me. Welcome back, Zombies. Alright, Zombies is back in Standard. It actually hasn't been that long since Zombies was essentially the best deck in the format in Standard a little while ago, before the last Standard rotation. And now, thanks to the latest core sets, there's a bunch of new additions to the deck. And then we've got a bunch of cards that were hanging around previously, like the Lord of the Accursed, the Liliana's Mastery. All of a sudden, they have new friends with cards like Death Baron and Graveyard Marshal. So this is just a straight mono-black deck. You can potentially go black-white. Personally, I like the mono-black version better. Of course, Graveyard Marshal is one of the new hits from M19, so this one is double black. One of the main reasons to be mono black. And it's a 2-mana 3/2. And you'll see that this deck, while it's a beatdown deck, you want to be curving out early in the game. You do have mana sinks, and Graveyard Marshal is an important way to kind of recoup and use the creatures that are put into your graveyard. Notably, I have gone with Metallic Mimic here over Scrappy Scrounger, because it just works better with the zombie theme. Having all zombies in your deck, with including the Mimic as a zombie, has real value to it. This is just a synergy deck. We have Liliana's Mastery, which is still just as good as ever. It's been always very good. One of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, card in the deck. And then we've got a couple copies of Liliana Untouched by Death. So this is the new Planeswalker, and it specifically synergizes with the deck, right? You can't really play it or utilize it to its full potential without playing it in a deck with a bunch of zombies. And here, we've got a bunch of zombies, right? So it's going to be good. It comes in with 4 loyalty. You tick up, you're able to drain your opponent. You can also use it as removal. You can use it to replay things. So it pretty much does everything you would want in this deck. Only 2 copies, because drawing multiples can be kind of frustrating in certain situations. And then we've got kind of 5 spot removal spells. We're not overloading on removal. We want a ton of creatures because we need creatures in the early turns. It's just, this deck is a beatdown deck, as I already said. It's just trying to curve out. We've got If Near Dead lands that can be used as removal, but mostly you'll know how good your draw is based on your opening hand. In terms of the sideboard, there's a lot of tools we have against control, with duresses, with some of the extra card draw. Then we have Dispossess. This is kind of a cool one against Godfarer's Gift, because that's one of the tougher matchups. And if you're able to take the Godfarer's Gifts out of your opponent's deck, then, as it turns out, that matchup gets quite a bit better. Harsh Scrutiny is against the black-green style creature decks. Some additional removal for other creature decks. And a 4th Bridge Prowler. This is a nice little one-up in the deck against a deck with a bunch of 1 toughness creatures. Say it kills a Llanowar Elves, it kills a Bomat Courier, then it's done its job. So I am going with the list with 8 Lords. Basically, you're just maximizing the power and toughness on all your zombies. You play an early zombie, all of a sudden it's a 3/3, a 4/4, or a 5/5. Lords just kind of combo well together, so I like playing all 8. The list is straightforward, but effective, and I will be showing off how explosive the deck can be. It can just go bang, 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 turn 4 wins. Like, the creatures just get huge so quickly when you have good draws. Sweet, it looks like we won the die roll. And have a keep. So this is pretty much as good as you can ask for in terms of an opening hand. We've got 1, 2, 3 in terms of creatures. So should be able to curve out quite nicely. with this hand. Okay, and fetid pools, so up against probably some sort of control deck. And we're going to land a Lord next turn, or at least attempt to. And this is exactly what the zombies deck, how the zombie deck wants to start. It's kind of a coin flip, really, which Lord to play. Likely, either one is a pretty good choice. And this is 7 damage here. Like, we can literally win next turn if our opponent doesn't do anything. Alright, Glacial Fortress, so we know we're up against Esper. Well, I think we play this Death Baron. It's likely going to get countered, but then we're still getting in for 9 damage. So I think we're happy with that exchange. We get in for 9. Puts our opponent all the way down to 2. And now, no Settle the Wreckage mana, so yep, our opponent's just going to concede. Wave the flag, and I want to sideboard. And that was pretty much the way you draw it up with this deck. I mean, perfect curve. Our opponent just couldn't keep up with what we were doing. So we certainly don't want our fatal pushes. Even though we may be up against a fairy, not really a huge fan of Contempt. Duress is where we want to be. Just allows us to play with perfect information. Get a card out of our opponent's hand. The Bloodfast is good here. And the last card I like is the Ruin Raider, because it gives us another source of card advantage. I think I'm going to shave a Liliana's Mastery. Card is good, but if we may not be winning the late game against these Esper decks. We really want to come out as aggressive as possible. This hand is pretty suspect because it's only 1 lander and we have multiple 5s. We do have 2 Duresses, so it's kind of close, but I think we just mulligan this. Our opponent also mulligan, so makes our mulligan feel a little bit better. And we're just going to keep this. I mean, I like this hand better just because we're looking for a spell. It always feels a little bit better to be looking for spells with this deck rather than lands. Like our mana situation, we're likely just not going to run into trouble there. We have the Duress, which is kind of interesting. Moral to Folly, not the best draw. Whether we want to Duress now, I think we do, just in case we see something like a Search for a Scanta. Hopefully we get something with this Duress. That's certainly the hope. Okay, so it's going to be a Glimmer of Genius. A Glimmer of Genius and 3 other lands. So not the best hand for our opponent, but they did actually put a card on top with their Scry, so we can assume that that's a spell. Yeah, I think this game could go either way, based on how this has started. Not in love with our start. We love a creature here to play. Mastery, like I said, in this matchup, it's weird. Like, it's good. It's a high power level card, right? But we didn't have the start we were really looking for this game. Doesn't mean we're gonna lose necessarily, because our opponent's draw hasn't been the greatest either. But turn 3 Death Baron versus a Metallic Mimic. It looks like those are the decisions. I'm going to go with the Mimic because it makes the Death Baron better. Just makes our future plays better. It does require taking a line where we're not being as mana efficient as possible, and it makes us vulnerable to Fatal Push, which is exactly what our opponent had. So a little bit punished, but at the same time, we're probably just going to play the Death Baron next turn. Maybe we've missed out on a couple damage, but it's likely going to come down to if our opponent finds a payoff card. Dread Wanderer actually a pretty good draw there, because it allows us to play 2 spells this turn. So we can go Death Baron and Dread Wanderer. Then next turn we have the Liliana's Mastery queued up. So we're gonna see here. Okay, cast down. That's fine. If this Liliana's Mastery enters the battlefield, I feel pretty good about our chances at this point. And I don't think there's really much of an argument. Oh, actually, this Rune Raider is an interesting draw. We could attack, then play Rune Raider. But I think our opponent could also just have another spot removal spell. This is the highest upside play. I'm going to go for it. And it did resolve. So we get in for 3. And our opponent's down to 1 card in hand. No Glimmer of Genius. We got rid of that one. That would have been a way to draw some cards. And here's a Glintsleeve Siphoner. So interestingly, our opponent is on a energy version of the Esper deck. So we found a Death Baron. So we have a choice now between that and the Ruin Raider this turn. The Baron allows us to get in more damage. And I think we want to just maximize our damage right now. So I am going to go with that Death Baron. It also means that the Siphoner can't trade for the Dread Wanderer. So this is a 12-point swing. Our opponent now kind of needs a sweeper, like a Settle the Wreckage or a Fumigate. So we could just see our opponent concede if they don't find one of those cards. Alright, we are on the draw this match. I'm going to keep. Pretty good hand in terms of curving out with creatures, which is what this deck does, essentially. There's a swamp. Wonder if that means that our opponent's also on zombies. That's certainly possible. It is one of the hot new decks. Oh, there's a Submerged Boneyard. So, probably not on zombies in that case, but Submerged Boneyard is also just not a card we see very often. So I like going with the Mimic. And you want to just get Mimic into play as early as you can, because then all of your other creatures benefit from it. It essentially forces a removal spell from the opponent. And I'm just going to try for this Death Baron. It certainly could get countered, but it did not. So we don't really know what our opponent's up to. And we may not get to know this game because our opponent seems to be getting run over. So, yeah. I'm just going to, I mean, this is just a really nice draw. This could just be the game. We'll see if our opponent has something for this. It looks like there is going to be a response. So Vraska's Contempt makes sense. Makes sense to play it on the Death Baron that was already on the battlefield there. But we still get to bring our opponent down to 8, and there's this Liliana's Mastery sitting in our hand still. And I think we just jam it. Our opponent, if they have a counter, they would have to have counterspell plus removal spell here. Pretty much. I guess they could just have removal, but then... I mean, best case scenario would be a counterspell for Liliana's Mastery and removal, but yeah, okay. We're done with that one. So under the assumption, based on what we saw, it's blue-black control. Certainly could be wrong. So if that's the case, we may want Vraska's Contempt for cards like the Scarab God. The Fatal Pushes we don't want. Bloodfast and Ruin Raider for some card draw. Duresses I'm pretty interested in. So we need 2 cuts. I'm going to cut Liliana's because, like, one of the only spells we saw was Vraska's Contempt, which answers Lily pretty nicely. Alright, well, this is one of the kind of awkward things about having Scavenger Grounds in our deck. Is this particular hand, but we're going to keep. It's definitely a cost to playing it, but if we draw another swamp, then it won't matter, and we did. And the Scavenger Grounds could have some important interactions against cards like Torrential Gearhulk, the Scarab God, cards our opponent certainly could have in their deck. But now we get to play a 1-drop into 2 more 1-drops. Which is really exactly what we want to be doing against any sort of blue-black slow deck. So we go Dread Wanderer, Dread Wanderer. And yeah, with the Lord of the Curse for next turn, our opponent... Okay, there's a Contraband Kingpin. That is a start for our opponent. So we still get to play the Lord. Believe we're getting in for 5. Our opponent blocks a Dread Wanderer. Could have a Fatal Push still. Okay. So now we're only getting in for 2. That's kind of annoying. But we can potentially bring that Dread Wanderer back into play later. And this Vraska's Contempt certainly could be useful here. In fact, ooh, that's an interesting attack. I'm just going to take it. Not really sure why our opponent's attacking. Okay, Bantu's Last Reckoning. Makes sense. Well, we're just going to redeploy in that case. We have 3 Dread Wanderers in the graveyard, so we can start bringing those back. Our opponent has to take this full turn off, which is huge. Okay. Now we pretty much have to cast this Graveyard Marshal, because we're forced to try to get under under 2 cards. Now, if our opponent has a second Bantu's Last Reckoning, that could be pretty brutal. Okay, tapping out for the Scarab God. Glad, very happy. We decided to keep these 2 copies of Vraska's Contempt in the deck. And this is probably just game over, honestly. I mean, not literally this turn, but in terms of the game, like, pretty hard for our opponent to come back now. Down to 3. Even a sweeper, and we still have these Dread Wanderers left in the graveyard. So this might just be lights out. Because our opponent isn't playing his cards like Settle the Wreckage, there's no reason not to attack with everything. Okay, this is main phase. That is a peculiar choice to play at main phase. So we can actually give our Dread Wanderer Menace and just win like that. So our opponent's gone ahead and kept. We're of course going to keep this one as well. On the draw, we'd like another play for, say, turn 2. That's really what this hand is missing, but can't have everything. Gonna play the Dread Wanderer. If we brick on a spell we can cast, we can play the Memorial to Folly. Set up our mana nicely. The Memorial to Folly is kind of a sweet one. Trying it out. The fact that it comes into play tapped can be hurtful. So we're going to play it. And we could leave the Wanderer on defense, but I think we just want to attack here. I mean, we're going to play the Lord next turn, which will make our Dread Wanderer into a 3-power creature. By the way, pretty decent chance our opponent's also on Mono Black Zombies. Some versions of this deck play Scrounger over Metallic Mimic. And yep, there's the Death Baron. So our opponent's also on this deck, or a version of this deck. So it's kind of a racing situation. We were on the draw, which is definitely hurting in this moment. We have a Liliana for next turn. So unclear if it's going to be good enough. We can also play another Lord. We could also theoretically trade for the Scrounger, but that doesn't seem good either. So I'm going to take this hit. That one hurt. Oh, and a follow-up Diregraf Ghoul. Ooh, okay, so we actually drew a Fatal Push. So I like getting our Lord into play. From here, I think if we attack, we could attack for 4. Yeah, it's a risky attack, but I'm going to go with it. The reason why I'm going with it is with Liliana, we could potentially have lethal next turn. And not sure blocking actually is good for us here. Clearly we're probably going to have to throw up a block, although we have this Fatal Push. So if our opponent simply attacks with all of their creatures. Alright, so it looks like holding back the Death Baron it does have death touch. It does mean that that these other zombies have death touch. So what we can do is we can put the Lord in front of Scrounger. That's going to mean if our, or even both Lords in front of the Scrounger, Fatal Push away the Ghoul. I think that's our line here. And we just kind of get super punished if our opponent has a removal, but I don't know if we're beating removal anyway. So, yeah, double block on the Scrounger and kind of wait for our opponent to act. Fatal Push away the Ghoul. I think we have to make this play to kind of protect our life sigil. But it looks like our opponent might have... Yep, there's a Fatal Push. So that's just brutal. That was a tough spot. We're probably going to lose the game if we don't do that. I don't think we're winning, but certainly more interesting. Alright, well, can't win if you don't try, so let's go ahead and play this Liliana. Plus her. Okay. Our opponent does have Scavenger Grounds. Oh wow, I think they just forgot to bring back that Scrap Heap Scrounger there. Because they have the Scrounger in the graveyard and the Diregraf Ghoul. So our opponent could have brought back Scrap Heap Scrounger. So yeah, going back to that double Lord of the Accursed block, our other alternative there would be to say Fatal Push the Ghoul, and then we would take, I think, around 6, but our opponent can still Fatal Push one of our Lords, but okay, so this is, it looks like our opponent has 9 damage this turn. We'll see if they care about attacking the Liliana or not. Oh, what? Okay, was that 10? Okay, yeah, my bad, that was 10. Okay, well, dead. So, sideboarding for this matchup, I think we do just want our removal. Cast Down, Walk the Plank, Vraska's Contempt are all pretty good. Fourth Bridge Prowler is good against the version with the Metallic Mimics, but not here, I don't think. Harvester is also fine. As another tough to answer threat. And then what do we take out? That's the big question here. I think Liliana is good enough. Contempt is still good. We can go kind of this more controlling, go with this more controlling game plan and take out the Diregraf Ghouls, which is kind of what I like doing. We're keeping our deck super high power level. Liliana's Mastery is still probably the single best card in the matchup. And by the way, I haven't played this matchup enough to feel super confident with the sideboard strategy, but You have to take something out. Liliana is another card. Potentially I could see taking those out, but maybe on the draw we take out Lilies. On the play they seem pretty solid. So our opponent does have the 1-drop. Okay, we drew Graveyard Marshal, so I think we still want to play the Metallic Mimic. It's so high upside if our opponent does not kill it, but I like getting it onto the battlefield. And in this matchup, I do think it's better than Scrounger. It forces a removal spell, and our opponent did have the removal, though. Alright, so... Okay, here, because we drew the Dreadwander, I think it's a pretty easy double creature turn. And we're just going to pass. So we can use the Graveyard Marshal to create some zombies if we want to. And we're just going to take this hit from the Dreadwander. I think because we're on the play, even though we're down to 15, we've got more pressure on our opponent. So we can slam. We can either go Death Baron or Contempt. Or activate Marshal, but I don't think that's what we want to do here. I think it's a pretty tough decision, actually. I'm going to go with Vraska's Contempt on the Lord, because the Lords just kind of snowball pretty easily. So we definitely have to get that off the table. It puts us up to 17, and now all of a sudden we're ahead in the race. So, yeah, if our opponent if we find something like a Liliana's Mastery, it's probably just game over. Okay, down goes the Lord. Come in for 5, and the thing about these matchups is there's so many cards you kind of have to answer. The Marshal's kind of a really annoying card to deal with. The Lords are really good. Okay, here's a Lily. Interested to see what our opponent's going to do with it. They are going to plus. And now... I definitely like playing out our Death Baron. And just going after the Liliana. Our opponent probably trades their Dreadwander for our Dreadwander. Then, okay, they're not. That's interesting to me. I would have thought they would want to keep the Liliana on the table. There's almost no scenarios where that really makes sense to me. To not trade Wanderer for Wanderer. Peculiar decision, certainly. So still getting in with the same 2 creatures. We don't need to risk our Death Baron, certainly. And now our opponent is going to make that trade. So because we're down to 1 card, we can actually just bring back our Dread Wanderer. And this is looking really, really nice. This could be Liliana's Mastery, which I don't think will be good enough, but certainly would be a decent play. Yep, it is the Liliana's Mastery. We do get to activate our Graveyard Marshal, though. And because of the Death Baron, all of our threats are pretty sizable. So I think once again, we want to leave back our Death Baron. So our opponent's going to make kind of the obvious trades. But we can actually play both. We can play our hand out and activate Graveyard Marshal here. So I don't think our opponent's coming back from this. That is a good play. Our opponent likely would need also a Fatal Push here as well to be able to kill one of our creatures, because I think that, yeah, we just had lethal, assuming our opponent didn't have a Fatal Push in that spot. So now we are on the draw. Our opponent chose to keep in Liliana on the draw. Not sure how I feel about that. I think on the draw you need at least some Diregraf Ghouls. And Liliana just kind of makes sense as one of the cuts. It's just pretty hard to have a board where you can play it on the draw where it's going to be able to stabilize and get going. So 2 Ghouls, that seems like a decent number. Harsh Scrutiny is another interesting part of the matchup. I think it's better on the draw. Here is a tough hand. I think we have to mulligan this. Only 1 land. Ugh, man. This is rough. Sometimes you get these types of situations. If near Deadlands, I think I'm going to put that on the bottom. Just looking for more action. The deck plays 25 lands, which is, you would think it would be a decent enough number. Most 2-land hands you're happy with. This was our first hand, of course, with at least 2 lands. But the Graveyard Marshal is a nice draw. So we at least have a curve of a 2-drop into a 3-drop. We'll see how strong our opponent's hand actually is. If near Deadlands... Okay, so our opponent likely doesn't have any more swamps in their hand, because they chose to play the Deadlands and the Marshal there. So hopefully on a later turn, we'll have a good opportunity to get the Dread Wanderer onto the battlefield. Our opponent just found likely a land off the top. That's very bad news for us, that our opponent was able to Doomfall us that turn. Not really much to do other than drop a Lord here. If we draw a land next turn, we could say go Lord plus Dread Wanderer, something like that. We could also play the Vraska's Contempt. Unfortunately, didn't draw that land, but we can still play out our Lord. Get in for 3. The race certainly isn't favoring us, but what are we going to do? It's so unlikely that our opponent has a bad turn. Yep, there's another removal spell. Hard to see us getting out of this. We'll throw. Actually, I shouldn't have done that main phase because now our opponent can fatal push our Lord. So, but I don't think we're. If our opponent has a fatal push, then they have a fatal push. Yeah, we are pretty dead here. Missed 2 damage because that play I already knew it. Like, it's one of those plays where you do it right, and then you're like, oh god, I know exactly what I did. And it's one of those situations where we're so far behind that it feels a little bit hopeless, but hey, you never know, right? You never know. All right, I'm gonna go in for this little trick attack, hoping our opponent blocks. So if our opponent blocks, then we could actually Vraska's Contempt and kind of blow our opponent out. But they saw through that line. So if our opponent blocks with Death Baron, we could then Contempt one of the lords. So we'll go ahead and burn our Vraska's Contempt here. So yep, Scrounger comes down. Just a land. And we're essentially dead on board here. Well, if our opponent has a land to activate the if near dead lands. But it looks like another fatal push, and that is. So we did win the Spiral. Okay. So we have a 1-drop in the Diregraf Ghoul. We have a 2-drop in the Metallic Mimic. No other creatures, but pretty easy keep. Just because we're playing a deck with almost all creatures in it. There's actually very few spells. So, yep. I'm going to start off with this Diregraf Ghoul, pass the turn. And Fetid Pools, so probably up against a blue-black deck of some nature, of course. Could be blue-black mid-range, could be Esper. We're of course going to name Zombie with our Metallic Mimic. That's not even a real question with this deck. We're always naming the same creature type. And unfortunately, it's unclear how good these removal spells will be. So we would like to draw another card to pressure our opponent. A little bit unlucky to find the fatal push there. So I like getting in for 4. Our opponent does have a cast down, so because we have all removal, we can't really put enough pressure on our opponent. This was kind of a key turn we wanted to have another threat for. Now, if our opponent plays something like a Glint Sleeve Siphoner, we certainly have answers for that. So that's just unlucky. Three fatal pushes in the wrong matchup. I'm not going to play the land. There's not really any value to playing the land. If I had 2 lands in my hand, I would play it, because then we could still draw Liliana's Mastery. I'm going to attack first and then play this Metallic Mimic. I will play the Swamp to potentially play around a Syncopate. And our opponent is on Grixis. So, could be featuring the new Nicole Bolas. Okay, disallow. That trades with the Metallic Mimic. And I'm not feeling too good about this game at the moment. We'll see what this is going to be. Okay, that's probably just going to take Vraska's Contempt. Need a big draw step here to really put some pressure on. That's just unfortunate. If we had the 5th land, that would be insane. We could slam Liliana's Mastery and most likely win off of that. Now, this could be the Scarab God, which would be really bad news. But, of course, it is the Scarab God, so that's going to enter play. Nothing we can really do. Second copy of Liliana's Mastery. Sure, we'll just give this to our opponent. I'm not really about playing out from here. Just kind of horrendous draws. Because given the specific matchup that we're playing. So looking at the sideboard, we're clearly going to take out the worst card in the matchup, which is Fatal Push. And I do like Vraska's Contempt way more because it deals with the Scarab God. Possibly Nicole Bolas if our opponent has that. Argyle's Bloodfast is a place we can go for some card advantage. I also like the Ruin Raider. And then we want some amount of duresses. There are some creatures in this Grixis deck, so we don't want to get too crazy on duress. But yeah, it's kind of hard to figure out what to take out after we know we're taking out the Fatal Pushes. I think because our opponent probably has Vraska's Contempts, we can take out the Lilianas. We're not gonna... The -2 probably isn't going to be killing our opponent's creatures because they're relatively large. And it trades for Vraska's Contempt. I think I'd rather have the duress package and the cheap plays while still being able to keep in the 4 copies of Liliana's Mastery. If we can actually get to 5 lands with the Mastery, that would be pretty sweet. And this is a keep again. We don't have a 1-drop. We do have that Metallic Mimic to start things off with, and then some Lords to follow up. So we can hopefully get some pretty beefy zombies onto the board, although our opponent's pretty likely to have some amount of removal to disrupt us. Alright, there's the duress. We probably would have cast it if we had had it on turn 1. We're not going to cast it here because it would just disrupt our curve too much. So I'm going to play the Mimic and then proceed with likely one of these Lords here. It's kind of interesting. We could attack with the Mimic first. Yeah, I think I'm going to attack with the Mimic first just to kind of bait out a potential removal spell here. I think it's pretty likely that our opponent has one that they're going to cast. And it is a cast down. And now we're going to go for a 3-mana Lord. I'm going to throw the Lord of the Accursed out there, just because it dodges some of the 2 damage removal, like, say, Magma Spray. It looks like our opponent is a bit mana screwed. So we have the option of Duress here. But I think I want to get the Memorial to Folly into play so that we can play Liliana's Mastery next turn. So for that reason, I'm going with Death Baron. And getting in there for 3 damage. We'll see if our opponent has another cast down or something of that nature. But yeah, this kind of feels like the opposite of the first game. We got pretty unlucky in that game, I would say. Now our opponent is on the wrong side of the variance. So sometimes you get games of Magic like this where it feels pretty clear who's gonna win in both situations. This Liliana's Mastery, our opponent doesn't have blue mana. There's no way that they can counter it. There's no way that they can get it off the board. So it's probably just gonna flat out win the game here. Comes into play. We get the trigger. We get to bash for 8. I mean, I guess if our opponent had a sweeper, we actually have this Memorial to Folly, so that even if our opponent does sweep our board with something like a Bantu's Last Reckoning, we can still rebuy a creature. We have another creature. We have a Duress. So that was a much better draw on our end and a much weaker draw of our opponent. So of course we won that one. And now game 3. I think I kind of like standing pat with this configuration. Don't think being on the player draw is enough of a reason to change what we're doing. This is an interesting draw. I think we're definitely going to keep. It's a lot of early threats, so our opponent, we could just run our opponent. We could just run over our opponent with this sort of hand. Of course, much better on the play, but we'll still accept this hand on the draw, certainly. Wow, another 1-drop. So we'll have a decision on turn 2. We can either play 2 more 1-mana creatures, or we can deploy a Metallic Mimic. What's this going to be? Okay, it's a search for a Scanta. That means that our opponent is not playing a removal spell this turn, but the search is definitely something we have to respect. So, kind of leaning towards the Metallic Mimic because we can then go Mimic plus 1-drop on our next turn. Whereas if we go 2 1-drops, then we can't make another play plus a Mimic on our follow on the next turn unless we were to draw another 1-drop. So the Mimic also here is pretty much a must answer. I think that if our opponent has removal for this particular Metallic Mimic, you have to kind of get that first one off the board. And our opponent will be pretty incentivized to try and do that. Sulfur falls into the graveyard means our opponent almost certainly has their mana situation figured out and is just looking for action / removal spells. See what this is going to be. Oh, ouch. That hurt. That was a Sweltering Suns. The reason why, by the way, I could have played Dread Wanderer or Diregraf Ghoul. I decided, of course, looking at this situation incorrectly, but I was thinking about Magma Spray as another card that these Grixis decks tend to play, which is why I went with the Ghoul first to try to bait out a Magma Spray, but then got Sweltering Suns. We'll see if that, hopefully that doesn't come back to bite us. This is still a fine turn. We got 2 for 1. We have a follow-up, and now it's going to kind of come down to what else our opponent can muster up. And I guess Nicole Bolas would be a reason to keep Dread Wanderer in hand. I wasn't even thinking about that. as a card to discard. Maybe this is something like a Doomfall. I think if our opponent goes Doomfall here, we accept that. We've got, no matter what, we'll have something to do on our next turn. Now, our opponent might have the Scarab God in their hand, in which case that's going to be annoying because we may just be a little bit too slow if our opponent plays an untapped land and drops that on the next turn. But we'll see. Okay, here's a Ruin Raider, so we're going to jam that. It's the one non-zombie, I think, in our deck post board. Not counting the Mimic, so it's not going to get a bonus. But we are going to be able to essentially draw a card here at the end of our turn. So playing a pre-combat doesn't really matter when we play it. We're going to play it no matter what. Okay, there's a Death Baron. So the Death Touch here could actually be relevant if our opponent plays a creature we need to attack past. There's an island, okay, into the graveyard. So certainly another Sweltering Suns or something like that would be pretty backbreaking. But if our opponent's passing the turn, that's good news for us, certainly. I think we just run out the Death Baron. Sure, it might get countered or dealt with in some other fashion, but we just want to get our creatures onto the battlefield here. And if our opponent's only able to play one spell this turn, that's going to be big, because even if it's a counter spell or a removal spell, we're still going to have a huge board presence. And since our opponent was not able to drop a big play like the Scarab God, it's going to be hard to actually answer everything we're presenting threat-wise. Maybe this is a Syncopate, the way our opponent's tapping. No, it's an Essence Extraction. Okay, so that is going to answer the Ruin Raider. And by the way, that just goes to show how good Ruin Raider is here. Because instead of answering any one of our zombies, our opponent decided instead to go for the Ruin Raider. So once again, we're going to play into a sweeper. If our opponent comes up with one, that's going to be very good. Pretty obvious that they don't have one at the moment. Interestingly, we can use the Scavenger Grounds potentially to disrupt the search for Azcanta flipping. But this game probably will not come down to that. So wouldn't be surprised to see another card like an Essence Extraction or Vraska's Contempt, but our opponent's still taking a ton of damage, and if we draw a land for this Liliana's Mastery, it could very well be game over, but we did not. So I'm going to attack in. The Contempt certainly provides us some insurance against. Actually, if our opponent plays a removal spell here, we can target one of our own creatures too. With the Vraska's Contempt. Okay, here's a commit. So commit means our opponent's only taking 8. Falling down to 1. I don't think we Scavenger Grounds here. We want to be able to Vraska's Contempt, and potentially if we draw a land, then we can play the Liliana's Mastery. I don't think there's a 6 mana card or 5 mana card that just blows us out here. I'm actually not sure what our opponent can do besides something like a Sweltering Suns. Okay, yeah, so here's a search. A scan of the Sunken Ruin activation, pretty much just waving the white flag. So we are going to be playing first. Let's see what we got. Okay, wow. We definitely want to keep this hand. Pretty explosive opening of 1-drop into 1-drop, 1-drop. So in terms of which one we play first, I'll go with the Diregraf Ghoul, just in case our opponent, say, has a 1 toughness creature. Like something like a Soulscar Mage is why I like playing this first. We're very likely to be able to get in 2 damage, and then drop the Dread Wanderers. If we hit that critical 3rd land, that's going to be really nice. Okay, Irrigated Farmland. Could mean a number of things. Great. Exactly what we wanted. So we're going to drop the Dread Wanderers. And this game could just be over before it began. The Zombies deck does have the ability to just have these super aggressive starts. Okay, it's going to be Esper. Seal away, sure. That's going to go after the Dread Wanderer. But, you know, our opponent can't contain all of our creatures. The Esper decks don't even necessarily play many sweepers. So, without a sweeper, it's just super hard to picture how our opponent actually gets out of this. I mean, this is pretty much as good as we can ask for. I mean, our opponent had the seal away, right? They had the turn 2 interaction, which is what they needed, but picked up a Liliana as well. So we can drop another Lord. No danger of Settle the Wreckage here, so we're going to smash in. And our opponent's just taking this hit. So, untap land, go. We have to be a little bit careful about Settle here. So I think we just attack with 2 creatures. We might even want to leave the Dread Wanderer. We attack with 2. This forces the Settle, assuming our opponent has it. Okay, so they do. And I like keeping the Dread Wanderer in play. I'm actually not sure here if we are supposed to commit another creature just because of Fumigate. But I'm going to, because we have the Dread Wanderer we can bring back. We have the Graveyard Marshal and the Liliana. We've got plenty of follow-up. If our opponent has a Fumigate. They actually do, okay. So that's definitely good here. That puts our opponent at 4. Well, we have a nice turn here. We can play Liliana and the Graveyard Marshal. And another reason why I think committing the creatures was okay is because of that Graveyard Marshal. And that is going to put our opponent down to 2. So our opponent now has to answer these last 2 threats. So they went Seal Away into Settle into Fumigate. Now, this still is a board that is incredibly tough to answer. Another Fumigate for the Graveyard Marshal would put our opponent at 3. Now the Lily can also tick down. Can tick down if we want to start casting zombies out of our graveyard. It's a little bit of a gamble. Plussing Lily. So if we hit a zombie in one of our top 3, then we do get the drain, but there's always the small chance that doesn't happen. So I would expect maybe our opponent has 1 removal spell. They may be forced to use a removal on the Graveyard Marshal, but interesting. So our opponent is just passing the turn. That's a little bit surprising. Well, in that case, I think we do plus Liliana. Just see if we get the win right here. And we did. Okay. Simple enough. So in terms of sideboarding, I like the Duresses and the Bloodfast. Duress is really good at disrupting these sweepers, removal. The Esper decks mostly have non-creature spells. The Bloodfast is nice as a way to draw cards, and so is the Ruin Raider. We're definitely not going to be playing the Fatal Pushes. And I like cutting the Contempt, cutting a Liliana's Mastery. So, yep, I think this is solid. And we are going to keep this. Not as great as our first hand, but still pretty solid. Got the Ghoul, the old Ghoul into Marshal start. And that Marshal after a sweeper can be really impressive. I mean, you saw it there. If even though our opponent 2-for-1 does, 2-for-1 does, 3-for-1 does with those sweepers, the Graveyard Marshal can then allow you to use all those creatures that hit the graveyard effectively. And the excess mana that we got from the Settle the Wreckage became relevant as well, because we did get 2 lands from the Settle in that last game. Aether Meltdown, okay. So that shuts down the Ghoul. Pretty much a 1-for-1 trade there. Notably, that does not put our Ghoul in the graveyard, which is a little bit unfortunate. So we go Marshal here. Still a 2-mana 3/2. This is one of the reasons to be zombies. Is this Graveyard Marshal? It's just a really solid Magic card. Reminds me a lot of some of the better zombies from the old zombies deck. Is that this is very comparable in power level. Something like a Crypt Breaker, which was a way to use your, draw cards, get some card advantage. This is kind of similar to that in some ways. So I think we do attack with the Marshal. Now our opponent could have a Steal Away, but we have a backup Graveyard Marshal. And it's kind of hard just not to attack. Like if we had a Duress, obviously we would cast it. We would have loved to draw Duress this game to have allowed us to operate with better information, but still fine here depending on what our opponent's got. Metallic Mimic. Yeah, that could be good. So here, notice I'm sending both creatures. Just in case our opponent has a settle, they have to settle the Ghoul as well. While this could be playing into Fumigate, I think we just have to play out the Metallic Mimic. And the reason why I say that is, say our opponent untaps and plays Teferi, for instance. They could just minus on our Graveyard Marshal, and then we would have no way of immediately getting the Planeswalker off the board. Interesting, so the cast out's coming end of turn, which likely signals no sweeper. And this could very easily... Okay, so it's going after the Mimic instead of the Marshal. That could also mean that our opponent had counter magic available. Hard to say. I don't think we can... Well, can we afford to play around a counter spell here? I think I'm going to attack first. It's a little bit of an information attack, right? Our opponent's probably got something. And since they're not doing anything, I'm just going to play the Ghoul. Hold tight. Feels like probably they don't have a counterspell, but this also gives us a way to get back in the game after Fumigate. Oh wow, okay, here's Patient Rebuilding. So this one starts milling cards and drawing cards, so it's kind of like a card advantage engine. Haven't really seen that card too much in action, being as it's a new card. That makes sense. Now though, I think we just have to push with this Liliana's Mastery. Try to get this game over with. Force our opponent to have a sweeper. Essentially. That's essentially what we're doing. We're able to attack for 7, put our opponent at 7. Now they are going to get this trigger from the Patient Rebuilding. We'll see how that goes. So we hit 2 lands, so that means they drew 2 cards off the Rebuilding. But, yep, sorry, that is going to be the match there.